Digital transformation has also permeated the humanitarian sector. Organizations are seeking to provide essential assistance to refugees, asylum seekers, and their host communities through digital means. Better communication, access to information, and to some extent, data collection has been achieved in some disasters and their aftermaths, and social media usage has increased. The real hype has been in the increased use of humanitarian or digital payment channels for humanitarian cash assistance. And in the remainder of this breakout session, we will call that eCBA, so electronic cash-based assistance. There have been many hopes expressed in eCBA becoming a pathway towards financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons or FDPs. Almost unanimously across the world, we see recipients of any CBA, whether it's delivered digitally or in hand, withdraw their entire amounts immediately upon receipt and not really using the digital account for financial services such as transfers, other payments, and savings. Financial service providers have also been slow to adopt digital channels for loan disbursements and repayments. For hosts, as well as the few financial service providers that actually serve FDPs. So in this session, we'll question whether eCBA is a relevant starting point at all to pave the way for a wider range of financial services that could then support FDPs to improve income and their financial health, the outcomes that they demand and that we heard about yesterday. We want to try and get to what is missing in the current approach. We want to understand where the mark is being missed. How well have we been addressing the inherent risks of eCBA? And which opportunities present themselves for us all to better support transition from limited humanitarian cash assistance to financial resilience and economic integration of refugees. So with that, we want to start this session with the presentation of a few more of the sort of in-depth empirical findings from Jordan, discussing the role of eCBA in supporting FDP livelihoods and financial health in Jordan, its limits, its risks, and to try to identify some of the bottlenecks. Swati and Metadawan will lead us through the main findings as a basis for a panel discussion with a fantastic panel that will come up just after the presentation. Swati, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Lene. Thanks for setting the stage, the context for the audience and the panel. And thank you everyone for joining in our breakout session number 3, I think it is. Just let me set myself up on the technical side. Yes. So as Lene rightly explained, when we talk about digital financial inclusion for refugees, the focus is often on digital humanitarian transfers, what she called eCBA, as the key entry point, or even remittances in some instances, especially in East and Central African countries. To make it clear, here the digital financial services is more appropriately discussed as a channel to deliver transfers. What you see on the slide here is a sort of a pathway to financial inclusion for refugees, where the starting point is the scenario where refugees receive cash assistance digitally, which can be withdrawn at touch points, but refugees do not have a store of account. So this is the first, like the one at the bottom of this pathway. This has been prevalent in Jordan, where refugees withdraw cash from ATMs enabled with iris scan authentication. The next step on the path is where refugees can own a store of account, a bank account, or a mobile wallet, where they receive humanitarian transfers. This means that they can cash out, they can leave money in, cash in, make payments and transfers. In Jordan, humanitarian organizations are beginning to shift to using mobile wallets to deliver cash assistance. However, this is a system which is not yet mainstream. So the host population is not using it as actively. And we would discuss this on the next slide. In Kenya, which is the other focus countries for fine research, we find that mobile wallets are mainstream, but refugees inside the camps only have limited access to M-Pesa to receive assistance. And these accounts are disabled outside of the camps. Now, the shift to digital has no doubt brought significant benefits. But has it really resulted in meaningful financial inclusion, or has it instead created a ghetto of financial services where refugees have restricted access to only a part of the financial system? The hope is that digital humanitarian transfers, often an entry point into broader financial inclusion, that refugees are then able to access suitable savings, credit, and insurance products that help them build livelihoods and resilience to overcome shocks. But what will it take for them to get from this level 2 to level 3, as you would see on the graph here? And what is missing and what are the risks? So we'll discuss a little bit more about what we saw in Jordan, where the central bank has recognized refugees as an important segment in the national financial inclusion strategy. Thus, it has lowered the barriers to access a mobile wallet account. Syrian refugees can open mobile wallets with what they have, something called the MOI card from the Ministry of Interior. Refugees from other nationalities, however, do not have this card and would need a valid passport. So basically, it excludes them from, for most of them, from owning a mobile wallet. DFS, more specifically mobile wallets, took prominence in Jordan in March 2020 with the pandemic. Now, the central bank over there started online registration and KYC verification for mobile wallets. And the country saw a 40% increase in the number of registered wallets over a short period of just 4 months, reaching to almost 1 million. That's about 10% of the Jordanian population. And this has definitely increased since then. This was already last year. A large part of this increase happened as the government moved to digital payments for its two big assistance programs, and which reached out to only vulnerable Jordanians. This was supported also with intensive awareness efforts through social media and television and expansion of cash in, cash out networks. The two graphs that you see here on the slide show how the transactions have increased, especially from April, May onwards. And this is mainly because people were starting to withdraw the money they received from the National Aid Fund, mainly the Jordanians. In Jordan, humanitarian organizations are also beginning to shift to using mobile wallets. UNHCR already conducted sort of a pilot. World Food Program is also planning a rollout, of a phased rollout. Several others are using mobile wallets to transfer cash support, one-time allowances, scholarships, and so on. But we see that the shift from the cash out use case, the first and the second use case, to the next stage use cases is not really automatic for refugees. Even within our research sample, most of the participants had opened the wallet in anticipation to receive cash assistance, and they used it only to withdraw the money. Some even closed the wallet and removed the application from their phone after the transaction was completed. Now, allow me to get to our provocative statement and bring to the table the voices of the participants who spoke to us for hours discussing the financial challenges they face. What we see is that while these efforts have been up to mark in delivering on the commitments to financial inclusion for all, access to digital financial services through ATM-enabled humanitarian transfers or mobile wallets with its current use cases does not really improve refugees' financial lives in any significant way. They are not really relevant to refugees' income generation. There are limits to this DFS approach. First of all, ECBA, or cash assistance, is not really a main source of income for a majority of refugee households. So ECBA alone cannot be the key entry point. Also, we must help refugees solve their income problems in addition to finance problems, as we discussed yesterday. And then lastly, it'll take some time for the network effects to build in, where the host population also starts to use mobile wallets actively. There are also risks. Not accepting the UNHCR ID for accessing wallets would lead to exclusion for refugees who do not have the MOI card or don't have valid passports. Refugees must also feel confident that their data and identities are protected so that they use the services actively. There are also opportunities but that must go beyond humanitarian transfers or ECBA. We will discuss a few of those on the next slide. But in any case, robust grievance redressal is crucial for users to trust the service. Also, financial literacy is important. But rather than standalone trainings, as has been the case in Jordan, it must be bundled with use cases which are relevant for refugees. So consider a case where a Syrian woman is supplying home-cooked meals through a meal aggregator and could be paid through a mobile wallet directly by the customer. But she doesn't know how to use a mobile wallet and lacks trust. Now, this is an opportunity for digital financial literacy where it's relevant, where the use case is also relevant for this, in this case, a refugee, a Syrian woman refugee. So while the efforts made so far in Jordan has led to tremendous uptake of mobile wallets, we see that it has not really led to financial inclusion, let alone improved financial health. Going back to the financial health framework we discussed yesterday, I would really like us to bring back the focus on the outcomes that refugees really care about. We often think of a solution, in this case, a mobile wallet, and then look for the problem to solve. And on this breakout group, we have a lot of people from the financial inclusion sector, as I saw in the chat. But after speaking for hours with our participants, we can't help but say again that what keeps them up in the night is not how they can make a payment more conveniently and in a cashless way, but rather how they could get resources to pay bills, to repay mounting debts, how they could improve income in the future, and how they could better prepare for the next health shock. So as we design more financial services to be delivered digitally through mobile wallets to refugees, let's keep those in mind. And also keep in mind this livelihoods progression graph that we discussed yesterday, where we saw that the demand for financial services only co-evolves as livelihoods progress. Now, these two frameworks would maybe help us to get the user needs back into the center. We did see a few examples of interesting use cases emerging from our field data. For instance, occasionally refugees were crowdfunding money for urgent medical expenses. We saw that especially with Somali, Yemeni, and Sudanese refugees right after arrival in Jordan, but even in the survivalihood phase among Syrians who have relatively wider networks with Syrians and other Syrians and Jordanians. A mobile wallet could perhaps help do this faster and also reach out to an even wider network. But it would still need a bigger base of wallet users first. There have been some examples in Africa that we could learn from. Our participants also expressed the wish to save. Informal saving groups are already quite common in Jordan among Jordanians, but most refugees are not able to join them as they cannot commit to the fixed regular contributions. Some said that they would like to join saving groups so that they are able to repay the mounting debts that they have. Mobile wallet providers could maybe design saving products that support the saving cycles for refugees and, of course, also low-income Jordanians and migrants, allowing flexible savings with low or no cost and providing for mental accounting where people could basically put different savings in different buckets for different purposes. So that's basically digitizing what they're already doing with cash. Mobile wallets could maybe also support development of gig economy or help small businesses sell their products and services online. Such online marketplaces could then support their incomes. So these are some of the use cases which we saw could be relevant from an income generation and livelihoods perspective for refugees. That's all from my side. Thanks for your patience, and over to you, Lene, to introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Swati. That was an excellent overview of some of the more detailed findings. And now, to discuss all of this, I would like to introduce our phenomenal panel to discuss these issues and to figure out how we deal with the juxtaposition of hope and hype in the digital humanitarian cash transfers. Why is ECBA missing the mark in ratcheting up refugee livelihoods? And what can we do to increase its relevance? If the hope of digital humanitarian cash transfers translating into better financial health remains unfulfilled, why is that? And Matthias, what does the limited uptake of eCBA through mobile wallets in Jordan tell you about the additional needs of FTPs to effectively use this instrument as a springboard to better financial health?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lean, and thank you for Swati for this great introduction and for having me here on the panel. I'm maybe a short introduction. I'm working at the Remittances project in Jordan, working on financial inclusion and financial inclusion of refugees and the vulnerable Jordanians. And to your questions, I first of all have to underline what the findings already found, right? Financial health is more than just access to digital financial services. And I think from our experience here in the country, there are basically two main things beside, of course, financial literacy, which is naturally and needs to always accompany the work with the beneficiaries. Is the two main things. The first thing is the working ecosystem. Like you only get the benefits from the services if there's a working ecosystem already in the country, so that the funds that are received digitally can be actually used for the basic needs to go to merchants and buy things and to do people-to-people transactions and things like this. So I think to start with the vulnerable and with the refugees and hope that they will create the market, I think is difficult. It needs to be embedded in an already existing ecosystem. And the second of all, as you said, is, or as the study also said, there need to be use cases for the specific target group that have the potential to improve livelihood, that improve resilience, that they actually see a value in using the digital financial services. And this could be income generation, savings, insurance, loans, and things like this. And yeah, we as Remittances, as our name says, digital remittances, we focused a lot in the past years on actually providing or giving the opportunity to receive remittances cross-border from the diaspora in other countries from family and friends, but also sending remittances cross-border to somewhere else. That's kind of that was our big focus, but we're also working on getting merchants and shops to accept digital payments so that you don't have to cash out and go with your money. And we're also working on, or have had pilots that micro insurance products are implemented or included into the mobile wallets and things like this. But then this all, as also came out of the findings, which I can only underline, is that depends on the political backing and on the political framework we're working in. And this comes back to the rights of your refugees. If the refugees don't have the rights to work or don't have the rights to access these financial services, as we heard, for Syrians, it's possible in Jordan here, but refugees from other nationalities, for example, don't have the opportunity to even register for the mobile wallets. This is very important. And so, yeah, this is these are the main reasons why, of course, we have a lot of wallets and we have a lot of usage, but it doesn't improve yet the financial health. There needs to be more use cases and more innovative approaches and products, and there needs to be, of course, political backing and improved rights for the refugees.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I think you're touching on some really important points there that we see not only in Jordan, but in many other markets. George, I would like to get your take on this issue. In the extensive work of IRC, where have you actually seen the digital channel adding value to FTPs, besides perhaps just receiving their eCBA?
Thank you so much, Lynn, for that question. And I would like to begin as Matthias. to thank you for including me in this panel. Now, before I really respond directly to your question, I would like to first of all do two things. First, I would like to acknowledge the statement which came from Swati. I am not going to do it verbatim. I think her findings reflected that refugees are mostly concerned with how they can pay their next bills than how to pay this digitally. I think you will see from our examples as IRC, I am going to mention how IRC is supporting refugees' economic well-being. Now, before I really deep dive into your question, allow me to give a bit of a summary in terms of how IRC work and whom we work with. So under our economic well-being outcome, which is one of 5 IRC core outcome areas, in addition to addressing humanitarian needs through ECBA, as you mentioned earlier, we work with communities, including refugees, to build their livelihoods and promote financial stability and ultimately their resilience. These people, particularly the refugees, have poor access to credit. They do not also have startup capital to enhance their livelihoods. If they want to access credit, they do so through informal channels. This means formal financial institutions are usually inaccessible to them. Now, as IRC, we do have a strong track record of supporting clients such as this in financial and economic inclusion. We do have current programs supporting savings and loans groups that have started looking at, and we have also started looking at ways of how they can benefit from digital financial inclusion. And now this takes me to now responding to your question, where IRC has actually found benefits in terms of digital financial inclusion outside of ECBA. How are we doing this? In Uganda and Cote d'Ivoire, we managed to connect savings and loans members, 50% of whom were refugees, to banks. You can agree with me that banks are mainstream financial institutions. Then within, that initiative, IRC and bank agencies have actually introduced and provided some training on the digital aspects of banking services to our clients. Whilst we wanted this to work smoothly, we have encountered some drawbacks. For example, in Uganda, we did not really see great uptake in usage of the digital connection, which we did for our savings and financial groups with the banks. Clients actually preferred going to bank agents to handle transactions, even if distance was really an issue to them. They would choose to really say, we don't want to interact with the digital platform on our smartphones. We would rather go to the banks. There were factors pushing our clients from digital participation to interface with human beings. For instance, the digital services in Uganda had numerous glitches in the beginning, which reduced the clients' trust on the system. They were not really trusting it to say we can really do transactions online because there were some glitches, in the system. Then digital literacy was also low to medium among our clients, which caused a challenge for some of them to interact with the system. This means they preferred actually to interact with the human being, as I said. So, and also in both Uganda and Cote d'Ivoire, there was a limitation in terms of the gadgets or the infrastructure equipment which is needed by our clients to transact. We are talking about refugees here. So the system actually demanded for them to have smartphones. So this introduced an extra cost on the savings and loans groups that we were attempting to support. In terms of us and the banking agents, there were also extra costs related to refresher trainings, which was a bit demanding. Now, we looked at ways of how we could address some of these challenges, because I want to align this to the issue which you asked me about benefits. In attempting now to address the challenges, we wanted the refugees to benefit from our initiative. So what we did was, for instance, in Cote d'Ivoire, we trained some community-based trainers and set them on a payment transfer and began allowing them to make transfers and process withdrawals on behalf of project clients. This worked because, you know, the community-based trainers were trusted by the clients, and basically they acted as commission-based bank agents. However, the solution did not really work well because it really had some risks, and it did not really address the barriers our clients were facing. Our clients could still not bank digitally, and there was also a risk related to them being helped by somebody else. You know how it does. I mean, with money, there's that risk. Then that aside, the challenges aside, I want also to bring to our attention the benefits which we have seen in digital transfer systems in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, I think if you read around, you can realize that only 14% of the adults in Ethiopia have access to credit, and slightly above 1% of the rural population have bank accounts. So obviously, this is low if we relate it with averages across sub-Saharan African economies. The IRC is attempting to support savings and loans groups there in Ethiopia, including refugees who are also like members of the saving and loans groups, to be aligned with also mainstream banking facilities. We are also trying to link them with a mobile application, which is known as JampPay. JampPay is a web application. It's also there like on Google Play Store. It allows savings and loans association members to hold virtual meetings and provide a digital track record of saving groups, including how each member is actually making savings which are aligned to the savings and loans association. So we think in the long run, this can help our clients who are the savings and loans members in using formal financial services, as their loan history can be assessed by banks. We want them to be in the 14%, which I mentioned earlier, those who can access the loans, because the digital financial inclusion component, which we are encouraging in savings and loans, will leave a track record in terms of how they are managing their finances. Now, as I conclude, Lynn, I know you asked me in terms of benefits outside of ECBA, but I think I wouldn't have done justice to our IRC work if I missed to mention the benefits that our humanitarian responses have seen in ECBA. Because in mentioning this, I think I will be able also to show linkages in terms of, humanitarian cash transfers, how it is linked with long-term digital financial inclusion. So IRC normally uses humanitarian cash as a lifeline for refugees seeking to rebuild their livelihoods. But we have also seen the potential for enhancing financial inclusion. This is promising in the context where we work and where we are using the digital payments mechanisms, such as mobile money, that allows clients not only to receive cash digitally, I think Swati mentioned that, but also to complete transactions digitally. We have seen, like in Cameroon, there is an armed conflict there. Some of our beneficiaries are managing to keep or store some little meager amounts of cash on their accounts. I want also to take you through to the linkages which we have also realized in some of our contexts, like in Burundi, for example. GSMA and IRC recently conducted a study looking at the experience of clients who receive cash assistance via mobile money. The study found that the IRC's mobile money enabled CVA program was the first time some of our clients had on the phone. IRC program in that ECBA included instructions on how to use the phone. Now, I think you can agree with me that this will help our members, refugees, including the host communities, to improve their ability to interact with digital financial systems, and may use that knowledge beyond ECBA as they become informed and effective consumers of financial services, particularly digital financial services. And as I make my last concluding statement, I think ECBA can link with development-oriented financial inclusion. Congolese refugees in Bujumbura, for example, noted that they began taking advantage of offers from the mobile network operator, including on selling extra phone credit to make money. And we just hope that IRC with mobile network operators can increase the chances of refugees' interaction with digital services beyond ECBA. Thank you.
Thanks very much, George. Important examples of how digital is relevant to refugees, even if the pathway straight to financial health might not yet be so clear. Switching now to the private sector side of the supply. Ida, the distribution of humanitarian aid digitally has obviously been an important business line for Safaricom, but where have you seen take up in the usage of ECBA for refugees or other forcibly displaced people as an indicator for demand? And if you haven't, why not?
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you for having me in this discussion. I work within a team called Technology for Development within Safaricom PLC, where we focus on in terms of co-creating with like-minded partners to deliver social impact and sustainable products that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goal. So indeed, a very interesting discussion for us. So if I look at in terms of some of the hiccups, we've been able to do a couple of partnerships, and one case I'll talk about is the World Food Program partnership in provision of Chakula Chap product that was targeted to refugees in Kakuma and Dadaab in Kenya. And this is more on the northern Kenya. And to deliver this, one of the key challenges that happens within the refugees and delivering mobile solutions is on the KYC requirements, know your customer requirements. So the refugees, most of the refugees are undocumented. And again, also there is that element of the alien ID is not recognized by the government of Kenya as a legal document. So when it comes to us in terms of delivering the digital financial inclusion, then there is that challenge of registering SIM cards to the refugees. So at the end, like a case I'm talking about of WFP, the Chakula Chap, we have to register the organization or the development partner SIM cards with their names, and then from that we can be able to offer the e-vouchers now to the registered refugees. So ideally, there is a lot of hiccups, and for us, it's more about advocacy and really looking in terms of partnering more with like-minded partners to continue the advocacy with the government to allow the use of alien IDs and really the legalization of the refugees within the country. So that's what I would comment in regard to that. Thank you, Lynn, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Ida. Those are indeed these foundational rights and access to foundation services that we've been talking about, which are so important. You mentioned a couple of these difficulties that really feed well into my last panelist, John. In the UNHCR Displaced and Disconnected research, looked at the legal and regulatory barriers for FTPs to digital connectivity, both with SIM cards and sort of digital financial services more broadly. What did you find, and could you elaborate on the risks that come with increased digital inclusion for FTPs, both in terms of their data protection and privacy and security, but also for the organizations that provide ECBA? Where do we need to focus our efforts to ensure less risk and more protection in the digital humanitarian aid? Is it all about digital financial literacy, or how can we build better trust?
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks for having me here today. I've got a couple of points, and I'd like to rewind before addressing your two issues, mainly looking at regulatory barriers and risks. And I'd just come back to the title of the session quickly. And I know there's been some almost what I would call vernacular interchange, and I think it's important to clarify these. The difference between eCBA missing the mark is maybe different from digital financial services. And obviously within the scope of digital financial services, there are some that are more inclusive, open systems, and some that are more closed loop systems. So it's not really a question with a fair answer, I would say. And a lot of what we're talking about are related to tools, and they're not going to be panaceas to solving all of the problems around financial health and livelihoods, but rather tools that come with a broad set of risks and benefits, which I think we can talk about today. So maybe just to first look at the benefits. You know, to rewind, we do a lot of assessments with different communities about what they're looking for in terms of not only relating to their financial future and livelihoods, but also around how they access and use digital technology. We've had reports from West Africa recently, as well as in the Americas response to the Venezuela crisis, as well as reports like the digital lives of refugees that UNHCR worked with the GSMA, that point quite strongly to a desire to adopt digital technology amongst refugees and other persons of concern, and see opportunity in it for them to improve and enhance their livelihoods. Obviously, the impacts of digital technology specifically are broader than just economic. They cover access to information, education, training, things that are absolutely vital for enhancing people's economic prospects and futures. So I think when we look at these issues, we need to consider it as a systems approach, and rather than just as one aspect of that. And when we look at the financial dynamics, I think it's important to look at the digital economy more broadly. And this is where, even if we see inclusion as a prospect and maybe not hitting the mark right now, we know with the increasing growth of opportunities within the digital economy in the years to come, this will obviously be increasingly important. So yeah, I think with that issue, we do need more research looking at how digital tools more broadly are impacting people's livelihoods and opportunities, profitability, refugee businesses, and for entrepreneurs. And that's something UNHCR definitely will be continuing to work on with many partners. And I'm sure that'll be something coming out and springboarding out of the FIND research. The second point around the legal and regulatory issues. Yeah, you mentioned the displaced and disconnected research. We've looked at legal and regulatory barriers to connectivity in digital financial services across 30+ countries now. And we know that there's something of a hard stop. And while I would say that overcoming these will not lead to solutions in terms of people's livelihoods or financial health, they're definitely something of a prerequisite. And that those who are unable to be included within these systems get marginalized much more significantly. One thing to note as well, I think that's important, is when we talk about these issues, there's been something of a separation between digital and financial in the past, maybe. And actually, we're seeing now with an increasing harmonization between frameworks for SIM registration and access, as well as financial regulation, and now digital financial services. Will essentially, and many governments are trying to tackle these things holistically and together. And often that links with concepts around foundational identities, which are obviously critical and don't just apply necessarily to citizens, but also potentially, if advocacy goes the right direction, to including refugees within those systems, that will allow greater inclusion more broadly. One of the points I would like to bring up specifically around the legal and regulatory environments that we've looked at recently is in Mexico, actually, where they are one of few countries that don't have a framework for mandatory SIM registration. And actually, this has led to many refugees being freely able to access SIM cards, register prepaid SIM cards. Now, one thing, and this is demonstrated in the FIND research, is that this isn't translating to financial inclusion very well, even though there is a tiered KYC structure in Mexico, which allows for low value bank accounts to be established without credentials. Banks themselves are taking this in different manners than what's actually included within regulation. So it's not just an aspect around regulatory and policy issues, but also how private sector organizations, both FSPs and mobile network operators, are interpreting policy and applying their own protocols and procedures that either do or do not facilitate inclusion. And one of the interesting things about Mexico now is they're currently in the process of considering whether to change SIM registration frameworks to actually require biometrics. And this is where we come to the point of today, which you were looking at around risk. And these are opportunities, obviously, for greater inclusion in certain contexts where perhaps you can authenticate individuals against identities that they hold as refugee IDs or those potentially provided by UNHCR, but also could contribute to exclusion if not implemented correctly and in the right sort of way. So I think with these, there are absolutely matters for risk that need to be considered with such systems, whether government-led ones or those with humanitarians. Actually, there's some great resources out there that support how to manage and mitigate risk, particularly data protection and privacy issues. The Red Cross, the ICRC have a data protection handbook that specifically looks at eCBA and the factors that need to be considered. I would encourage anybody to look through that, and that will give a good outline. Obviously, data protection policies and organizations are absolutely critical at realizing that within any particular agency and moving forward on that. But one of the things I also wanted to touch upon is exclusion also comes with risks. And what we've seen, and this is demonstrated through lots of research that we have, including a recent report connecting with confidence, is that refugees are taking informal workarounds that present quite strong risks to their identity, registering perhaps as somebody else. And this is also mirroring FIND research, that these workarounds do present risks. And even if there may be some solutions that look at using technology to enhance eCBA or something like that, it's often something, if you actually speak to refugees, that's something that they are looking to pursue and see as maybe not ideal, but it's a trust that they place in humanitarian actors. And the critical thing is that trust shouldn't be misplaced. And that's where those issues are actually really, really important to get right around implementing systems that put power into the hands of the individual, that have adequate training and support, as well as complaints and feedback mechanisms to allow recourse if things are going wrong. So finally, just to wrap up, sorry, I've used a bit of time here. While there are different levels of maturity in DFS in different markets, all trends are pointing to greater adoption prevalence across the board, highlighting their criticality. And I think one of the things that I'd just like to end with is around closed loop and open loop systems. And this is something that's been referenced a couple of times, to not conflate digital financial services that are closed loop with those that are open loop and promote inclusion. That's coming nearer, as the conversation yesterday was going, to mainstream financial services. And sometimes they're more digital than others. That depends on the growth, but the directions are pointing digital. So laying the groundwork now is definitely not a bad thing from a humanitarian perspective. And we know from speaking with certain financial regulators, including in IDA's case, the Central Bank of Kenya, that actually having a closed loop system like the one that Safaricom do with WFP is trying to prove the case to make a more open system, to address security concerns and so on, and support advocacy ultimately to more inclusive. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate it, and important aspects that we all know of. Talking about these new developments that we go into as we begin to see that just the fact that an account in your own name may actually be more interesting than a corporate account with a humanitarian organization. I wanted to throw it back at Matthias. Do you have any innovations in the pipeline in Jordan based on what you've seen so far in terms of how the mobile wallets, such as they are and as limited outreach as they have currently, might be developed further?
Yes, thank you. I mean, yeah, as we heard from Swati, especially in the market of the refugees, we are just in the process of rolling out with humanitarian partners, UNHCR and the World Food Programme, to actually provide the cash-based assistance through mobile wallets. So, like honestly, there's not like a good example as of now. In the pipeline, we talk with many private sector partners, and we feel like there is momentum and there are good ideas for microfinance. Of course, remittances is for us a big focus and a big part. We look at fintechs who have good ideas also in neighboring countries, and we try to network or provide a network and a dialogue so that they can exchange. But honestly, as of right now, it's limited because there is not the foundation laid yet, and it comes back to the point that the rights for the refugees need to be there, and the opportunities and the work opportunities and things like this to actually work. We have experiences, for example, with vulnerable Jordanians for microcredits for water cleaning, which had a tremendous well outcome with a credit default rate of less than 2%. So this is hopeful, but yeah, in the sphere of refugees in particular, it's limited so far. We have to admit that.
And that's not only the case in Jordan. I just wanted to circle back to Ida, because now, again, the regulatory framework in Kenya is restrictive currently. But do you think that if the regulatory framework permitted MNOs like Safaricom to onboard refugees for full M-Pesa accounts, and you could do that legally, do you think that there is a use case for you as a company? Which products and services do you think you would offer? What would be the demand? And do you think you would be able to generate a use case for you as a supplier without full underwriting of risk from humanitarian funders as so far?
Thank you, Lynn. Very quite interesting solution. Yes, there is a lot that we can be able to do, and a lot of products that you can be able to work on with the right regulatory framework. So, for example, know your customer requirements, which requires a national identification card. If we get like refugees and internally displaced people to have that, especially the refugees, we can venture into different areas. Like we could be able, the same way as I said about like the World Food Program partnership on Chakula Chap Chap, we can be able to scale that kind of a solution whereby we are giving the development world and the donors the possibility of sending money with conditions, like a sure pay model in such a way that whatever amount of money you are sending is going to a specific need, maybe for health. So we are able to give those e-vouchers that are tied to the specific refugee families directly, and they can be able to redeem those e-vouchers. So e-voucher is a very good use case that you could be able even to implement at a scale where we have refugees themselves owning. And not to mention about that, where we have those regulations really favorable for us, that means we'll be able to get a digital identity for the refugees, and we can be able to provide solutions around even elements to do with disaster management and recovery. We can also be able to do elements to do with education, because it's also very key in terms of trying to see how do the refugee parents pay for their children through the digital services, digital financial inclusion. So we could be able to coin around some of the areas in terms of how they can be able to save for school fees, for example, save for even the digital chamas, because chamas mean like those groups that we are talking about in terms of seeing, as George, I think it's George who mentioned that they are in Uganda, there are those groups that they are formed to be able to do economic empowerment for them. So a lot of opportunities for us because that means that the regulation will be allowing more innovation. And even now as we speak, we also are pushing for more innovations, looking at the different ways of going around really innovating within the same environment, the regulatory framework that exists. And that's why we are providing things like organization come in, register IDs under your name, check the security, check the risk, and you're able to help you in terms of the digital, offering the digital M-Pesa services to the refugees, and they can be able to redeem to our respective merchants, because they are all distributed countrywide. So a lot that can be done, and also looking in terms of our network, a lot that can be done in terms of the innovations and impact that we can have together as development partners, as well as the MNOs. Yeah, so I would say, yes, we can do a lot of innovations, and that's my passion. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Ida. I really appreciate that there is an interest from the MNO side, We just need to get a few more of the FSPs involved in as well to make sure that we can broaden out the products that are available. At this stage, I'd like to open up for some questions and comments from the audience. Please use the chat box for specific questions to our panelists, or just raise your hand. I'll try and monitor the screens to see everybody. If you don't get heard, put it in the chat box so that you can make a comment. I saw one question already from Raul. Swati, I don't know if you want to direct that question to George, maybe?
Yeah, so Rahul from Jordan, from DRC in Jordan, had this question about credit history, and if there are examples of using digital financial tools in developing credit history for refugees, which could then be used to reduce the perceived risk of lending to refugees by MFIs and banks. George, you discussed some of the experience of IRC in savings and loan groups. Would you say that there was a success story over there? Yeah.
Okay, good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Swat. The IRC is still, like in the initial stages of implementing some of the examples which I gave. For example, the Jampier in Ethiopia, including in Uganda. We are connecting our savings and loans groups, as I said, with digital financial services. But to really say we have documented success stories as of now, I think this is too early in the stage. But then as we implement the responses in the countries which I mentioned, we will take note and begin to document lessons such as this. And usually we do these researches and share our lessons widely. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, George. Yeah.
Go ahead, Swati.
Yeah, Rahul, if you have a follow-up question, I'm asking you to unmute, and just in case you want to ask any follow-up questions.
Hi, everyone. No, this is great. Thanks so much for the information, George. And Swati, thanks so much for pointing to the technology platform that you mentioned, Tanda. I will definitely take a look at that. So basically, our idea is to see if the use of digital tools could somehow provide the sort of eKYC requirements that many MFIs and banks have, and if their participation in the usage of digital tools, mobile wallets, maybe savings groups and credit groups and whatnot, can then be used to sort of reduce the perceived risks that a lot of refugee and displaced populations have when it comes to formal lending institutions. So we're still conceptualizing or trying to create new concept notes around this. And I was just wondering if there's any examples.
Swati, do you want to proceed with the question that we received from USA, from Diana?
Do you have that, Lenny, in front of you? Then maybe you could just proceed with the question. From USAID. So the question from Diana from USAID is, if you could do only one DFS solution in Kenya and Uganda for FDPs, what would it be? I mean, I don't really have an answer to that question. If someone from the panel, or perhaps Lenny, you with all the experience, could answer that question, or we do have some experienced participants in the discussion room.
George, what would you say, or Ida? You have one DFS that you can promote. Which one would it be?
Oh, okay, for me, Lynn, I am looking at digital financial services that enhance refugees' livelihoods, particularly, like small to medium scale entrepreneurs. because I think Swati mentioned that normally refugees, they move from survival livelihoods and so on. I think it was also mentioned yesterday. So if I could ask for digital financial inclusion, it is something that aligns with rural populations, but also, you know, with small to medium entrepreneurs. So I am thinking of a solution where we can link maybe mobile money, financial services with mainstream financial service providers like a bank. Why am I saying this? We are seeing an increase in the use of mobile money in Africa, where e-wallets are not only used like to transact on the ECBA, like I said earlier, but people are actually transacting using their phones. We've seen vendors like vegetable vendors. They also sell through phone, particularly if they've got e-wallets. We have seen transactions happening in the communities, people selling goods to each other. And so I would like to see a linkage, particularly in our cases, IRC, of maybe of our savings groups, the jump here being linked to a mainstream financial service provider, and then we take it on like from there. Thank you.
Maybe Lynn, I can add on to George's point. Looking at the Kenyan context, and I know also Safaricom, we are also expanding. So we have like a Vodacom group that also we collaborate within that whole the other markets. So I would say like the increase in terms of the usage of the M-Pesa solution will really help in terms of really co-creating on top of it other products that could really solve the issues to do with health, the issues to do with education, because once the money is locked in the wallet and you've given like the conditional usage of the wallet, then it really helps in terms of creating more impact and also ensuring there is an improved livelihood for the refugees. So I would agree those are some of the things that we would look into and ensure that we are also getting more people using the M-Pesa for the refugees and also redeeming their vouchers, and also within the agents that we have, the agent network that we have, and the merchants. Thank you.
Thanks, Ada. And perhaps we could then eventually move away from conditional e-vouchers and into proper financial products, by where we probably need a bit more intervention by the microfinance institutions around. And we're seeing some interesting linkages, like George was referring to, with the VSLAs and the banks. We're seeing some agent banking moving on as well in northern Uganda with Rufi. We're seeing Ugaford going into Nakivale. And in Jordan, as well as in Lebanon, we are seeing the MFIs beginning to serve refugees with standard products that are available for everyone. So there is progress, but we are nowhere close to where we should be with this market segment. And I think we should be pushing towards ensuring foundational rights as well, so that full financial inclusion or access to financial services makes sense, because they can now underpin the growth of a micro or small business. And I think this is what we've been hearing all along. I want to start wrapping up this session. There will be opportunities later to ask more questions of our panel as well as our presenter. But I'd like to ask all of our panelists to leave us with a final word, and it must be just 1 minute because we don't have any more time, to sort of focus in on what could we do, what would be your key recommendation to enable digital humanitarians and development actors to support the speedy progress of informal micro businesses of refugees or hosts, really, to more sustained, more resilient livelihoods. What would be your key intervention that if you ruled the world tomorrow, you would implement immediately? John, can we start with you?
I think probably less focus on technology and more focus on people and policies. Ultimately, I think a lot of what this comes down to is questions of inclusion and addressing some of those like hard stops that we talked about as regulatory barriers that allow and empower people to take matters into their own hands are absolutely critical. You know, get rid of those informal workarounds that present risk, allow them to be able to move forward, and then obviously giving them the tools to sort of build their own livelihoods using the opportunities that are provided by digital technology, where humanitarian actors then focus on mitigating the risks rather than pushing particular products or services, which the private sector does quite well on its own with. So for me, that would be the priority. And I think that the advocacy around those enabling policy and regulatory environments require all humanitarian aid development actors to be on the same page and with industry, hand in hand to governments, to try and get to that point where we can get people being able to exercise their rights to be digitally included and digitally financially included.
Yep, I don't think you'll find many who disagree with that. If we could get to a stage where it's not so important what status you have, but that you're actually an economic agent in the country, I think that would probably be a great start. Matthias, what would you add as your final recommendations for this?
I mean, I can only emphasize and agree with this again. It's about advocating on the political level to increase rights and opportunities, to do whatever you want as a refugee, and then on the other side, for the private sector, be bold, come up with innovative solutions, try something out, and it will be successful, I think, if these both things will be tackled.
Yeah, on the supply side, what we're seeing is that the FSPs that actually do engage find that the refugee segment is not much different from the segments that they're used to serving, and actually sometimes even perform better. So yes, there are some stereotypes to break through.
Exactly.
Ida, from your perspective, what would be your final recommendation?
Thank you, Lynn. For me, it's more on advocacy. Let's really kind of form a stakeholder engagement platform with the HPs and the humanitarian actors that can really help in terms of advocating for policy changes. And also let's co-create more and also bring the research outputs that comes through into reality by really focusing on the specific needs for the refugees that comes out from the research. So I would really be more keen in terms of like, let's see what we can do with the research within the regulatory barriers that exist through partnerships, as we also try to make a case for the regulatory advocacy to be easy to implement. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's also what we're hearing here, that the more we can make sure that everybody, no matter their status, can access the products and services that are available, that would be great. George, if we wrap up with you, where would you say is the key recommendation that, based on IRC's extensive experience, you would say that we really should try and implement in the next year?
Thank you so much, Lynn. Of course, in Swati's presentation reflecting on the lessons from Lebanon, there have been some relaxation, by the institution in terms of KYC documents. But I think this is still a barrier, a regulatory barrier in some of the contexts where we work. So I would like to see that aspect addressed so that refugees can access fully functional digital financial services. Where the digital services are still new or underdeveloped, like the case which I gave about Uganda, the use cases should be expanded so clients can use in their daily life beyond just withdrawing cash. We want to see maybe network operators and financial service providers polishing off their services before they bring them to the refugees, for instance, or using refugees as experiments of what they want to give to the host communities. And lastly, I think we mentioned the issues to do with digital literacy. I think this should be addressed. Maybe one way of doing it is we can translate some of the financial services providers' guidelines and resources into refugees' languages. Perhaps I can say this is costly, but maybe this is one way of really assisting the refugees and ensuring that they have full access in mainstream financial service provision. I was actually thinking, maybe dreaming that to address that component, in addition to translating guidelines into the languages which refugees understand, maybe we can develop something which is automated, like voice commands on prompts from clients. In my dreaming, I was thinking something like, an interactive platform, a replica of Siri if we are to talk about Apple, or maybe Bixby if we are talking about Samsung. I know we've got the brains out there, and I think we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. And with those final words and great recommendations, thanks to Swati and our amazing panelists for helping us better understand the reasons why the CBA hike may not be fulfilling all the expectations of FTEs yet, and what we need to do more of and better